I didn't grow up thinking I was going to be a writer. I didn't grow up reading. I didn't have books in my house, not because I don't come from a family that works really hard, but my mother was studying accounting, and she was putting herself through college while she was working, and you know, the goal really was, how do you find a career where you'll make money, not where you will sit and read books and write books or anything like that. So my first goal as a young person, growing up in Washington Heights with a family of, you know, of immigrants with big dreams, was, okay, how am I going to use my education to make money? The bad part of all this is that I was a terrible student. I hated school. I mean, I hated the kind of situations I was in. I went to LaGuardia High School, which for me was a big shock because I grew up in Washington Heights, and I didn't really leave the neighborhood that often as a young person. So to have to go to Lincoln Center area and study among people and being now a minority, before I was part of the majority, was a little shocking. Now I can articulate all this, but back then I didn't know what was happening, so I rejected it. I didn't feel like I belonged, so I didn't participate. And I was studying visual art. What was shocking to me is that I was there for 4 years doing visual art almost 4 hours a day, and it never occurred to me to be a visual artist, not once. And I'm thinking, and now I think, and I say, why didn't I do art? Everyone else was applying to Cooper Union, Parsons. It never occurred to me. At the time I had to, because visual art is expensive, I was working. So I started working in retail stores because they would hire you as a young person. And I was good at sales, so I started making more money than I've ever, you know, thought I could make. And I was still in high school when that happened, because I started working around the age of 14. And I was making money, and I was like, okay, well, this is what life is about. I'm making money, I can take care of myself. Now I have to go to college, because that was one requirement. My mother's like, I don't care where you go, but you have to go to college. I wasn't doing that well in school, but I knew how to draw, and I thought, okay, what can I do? And I really didn't have anyone to really guide me, so I thought, and I know this sounds crazy, but I thought, Oscar de la Renta is Dominican. He does fashion. I can do that. And I went to FIT. It's cheap. I didn't think it would be that difficult. I was completely wrong. It was probably one of the hardest experiences I've had in my life, because trying to make a dress well-tailored is a very, very difficult task. And, you know, and I have a new profound respect for people who do that kind of work. I was in the school for 4 years, but I wasn't doing that well. And I was also working full-time during that time. Because at this point I'm on my own, I'm doing really well, I'm managing a store on Madison Avenue. But as you can imagine, I'm 20 years old, I have way too many responsibilities, I'm always exhausted. And at some point I thought, okay, I've arrived. This is the goal, right? This is what life is about. And I was miserable. And I'm thinking, wait, is this it? Life can't just end here. And through like some strange situations where I started meeting people who were outside of this world that I lived in, who said, what are you doing here? You have options, you have choices. If you can do anything, what would you do? And I'm thinking, what would I do if I could do anything? And I said, I'd like to be some bohemian art writer type. And they said, well, do you write? I was like, no. Do you read? Not really. And this is like, it was like these small little moments that sort of directed me to think, well, why did I say that? And I was writing. I mean, I used to write in journals. I used to write the kinds of things that young people sometimes write, like poetry in their books, but nothing that I would ever show anyone. And so finally I did this. I was working, and someone, you know, I got to work on a television show for Bill Cosby on Black Entertainment Television. He was one of our clients in the store that I worked at. And this, I thought, okay, now I'm going to be a famous writer because I have this small little gig. It was just kind of I mean, the funny thing is that I said I could, this is something I said I could do it before I knew anything about it. And I didn't think I had to work very hard for it. And I realized, okay, I can't just write children's stories. They're not easy. So I had to go and read all the children's books that I never read at the age of 21. And I wrote these 4 children's stories for television. And I said, great, this is the beginning of my career as a writer. And I remember Bill Cosby saying to me, no, now you have to get an education. And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm smart. And I basically, at that point, decided if I really wanted to grow as a person, writer or not, I had to quit everything. And I left New York, I left my apartment, I left everything. And this was a big shock even to my family because they thought it was a step back, not a step forward. Because they're thinking, what, now you're gonna go and not make any money? And I chose to go to SUNY Binghamton and study literature. And I found myself working with some incredible scholars like Professor Carol Boyce Davies, who at the time was in SUNY Binghamton, and historian Tiffany Patterson. And they started really helping me understand, I used to, because as a young person, I was really angry about things like marginalization. Well, I didn't have the language. I didn't know there was such a thing as marginalization. I just thought, what's wrong with people? And that there's systematic oppression and that the system isn't fair. But at the time, I was just angry. And what I found in my education is that I found words to articulate the anger or to understand why, working at a store where I was selling $300 socks while my grandmother was still working at a factory making $300 a week. And how did that work and why did that happen? And really to take away the anger of blaming it on someone and thinking, well, what can I really do to make a change? At Binghamton is where I fell in love with books. And I fell in love with books when I started reading slave narratives, which is interesting because I remember reading slave narratives like the Frederick Douglass and the one by Linda Brandt, narratives of a slave girl. And I remember so affected. And I thought, this is my story. And it's a crazy thought. But I had a lot of connections to the idea that, that even in the worst situations, writing your story is a way to document your history and for people to understand why things happen. And then, of course, I started reading books by Latino authors, and I realized there are Latino authors. I didn't even know, until that point that there were Latino authors. And I remember just eating them up, and it was amazing because I went to Professor Carol Boyce Davies like the first week of school, and I said, okay, I only have 2 years to be here. You don't understand what I gave up to come here. I need to learn. So you have to give me like the quick way of getting all the information I didn't have the first part of my life. And she said, okay. And she just went to her bookshelf and gave me like 5 books. And she said, start here. And I just kept going back to her. I'm like, I want more. Give me more. Give me more. And I mean, I guess that's, reading just gave me a hunger to tell my own story. And not really my story, but just to make sense of what I was feeling and thinking and even to contribute to the dialogue. So